Everyone knows William Afton is a monster, but have you ever wondered what kind of monster he is? In the famous words of Lewis Dawkins, where did you come up with Springtrap? And in the more famous words of Scott Cawthon, I don't know. So today I'm going to answer a question I've been mulling over as of late. Just what kind of monster is Springtrap? And by that I mean, what's his type? Like we all know Dracula is a vampire, or the Xenomorph Queen is an alien, or Michael Myers is a League of Legends player. So what does Springtrap count as? Well, we'll start by explaining in universe what he is, or rather, in multiverse. Oh, and if you do end up enjoying this video, be sure to subscribe. Alright, because for this video we're going to be considering both the traditional game timeline version of Springtrap as well as the Twisted Ones version of the character, as when I started looking into these two, I realized they'd probably be considered different monsters. So let's start with Springtrap in the game universe. I'm sure I don't need to go through William Afton's whole history here, so I'm just going to give the details related to his transformation. One night, William Afton is hounded in the safe room of an abandoned Freddy's, and decides to escape the angry spirits haunting him by putting on the Spring Bonnie costume, the same costume he wore years beforehand to kill 5 children. However, whether it's due to age, moisture, or Afton's own carelessness, the spring-lock suit malfunctioned. When this happened, the suit's endoskeleton that had been pressed against the inside of the costume sprung into place, pushing itself into William, tearing him apart and mixing flesh and metal. But he wouldn't get a quick death. Instead, he was left shivering on the ground, bleeding out. His body would go undiscovered for 30 years, only to then be uncovered by a group who was looking to start their own Freddy Fazbear's themed haunted house called Fazbear's Fright. Cue FNAF 3. In FNAF 3 and other media, William seems to be able to control the suit now, resurrected with pretty much the same personality he had while alive, albeit more twisted maybe, insane, egotistical. So with all that being said, let's look at the options I found that most closely resemble our Bunny Man. These categories are zombies, ghouls, wights, revenants, and Draugrs. So I'm going to start ranking these by how well they actually fit our boy. First up are ghouls. Ghouls have a different meaning depending on where in the world you hear about them. In Western countries, they're pretty interchangeable with zombies and vampires, but in Middle Eastern countries where ghoul mythos originates, they're actually fairly unique. Although they can still be considered undead, ghouls are shapeshifters and tricksters. One of the defining pieces of ghoul mythos comes from their appetite, often credited as being grave-robbing cannibals. Some beliefs did indicate they would eat living people, but it's the grave-robbing aspect that connects to the original ghoul. So as I'm sure you can tell, this doesn't really line up all that well with Springtrap. In fact, the only reason I had ghoul on the list at all was because of the shapeshifting aspect of the lore, with ghouls sometimes taking the form of hyenas. In a way that kind of matches Afton, having shapeshifted permanently into a rabbit. But despite that, one could also argue that before he became Springtrap, Afton displayed ghoulish behavior. In fact, leading up to his death, what was he doing? Dismantling the animatronics he had stuffed the missing children's bodies into, in a way, robbing their graves. So that's my argument for a ghoul. After ghoul, we actually have zombie. And yeah, I'll be the first to say pretty much everyone calls Springtrap a zombie. Even I do it, but that's probably just because referring to him as a zombie is kind of funny in the way it juxtaposes him basically anywhere you place him. But is he actually a zombie? Well, kind of. To determine if Springtrap is in fact a zombie, we need to decide what kind of zombie we're referring to. I'm sure that many of you know that zombies were initially conceived in Haitian folklore as mindless slaves to a master. However, the modern day zombie stems from George Romero's Night of the Living Dead, where they were reimagined as flesh-eating, well, ghouls if you ask Romero. These were reanimated corpses who roamed the earth without rhyme or reason, only seeking to kill and eat people. Several renditions since Romero's zombies have become part of the zombie zeitgeist. For example, Return of the Living Dead, a film from 1985, added the detail that zombies specifically wanted to eat human brains, a detail which has become kind of a popular trend. But does Springtrap match up with Romero's zombie? Well, kind of. In FNAF 3 especially, Springtrap seems almost simple-minded, not really speaking or making noise aside from low groaning sounds. He's easily tricked by sound as well, something lots of zombie media depicts. However, as far as we know, Springtrap does not eat human flesh, as far as we know anyway. On top of that, he definitely retains a lot more of his intelligence post-death than the traditional zombie. While Romero's zombies were sometimes depicted more intelligently than you might expect, you see Springtrap in games like Dead by Daylight cracking jokes while they hunt people down, something far beyond any zombie's capability. That leads us to the Wight. Wight might be a name you've heard of before if you're at all into folklore or Dungeons and Dragons. The problem though with describing what a wight even is that there's no real set in stone idea for what a wight should really look or act like. In fact, some sources say that wight is an umbrella term, one that encompasses other undead like the ones I've already listed. As far as I'm aware, the most common description of a wight is one that also describes something called a Draugr. So think of this as the wight-Draugr combo. A wight is an undead creature that feeds on life forces, and this is why entities like vampires or zombies often fall under this term. However, a wight specifically retains its memories from when it was alive, albeit they usually have a more hostile or twisted personality than they may have had before, and this is actually pretty close to Afton so far. However, many depictions of wight that I saw were smooth corpses, with no rot or anything like that, which I suppose is another reason why vampires are considered wight. And as for the life force Afton feeds on, one could make an argument that he does feed on fear, or causing terror is what drives him. However, wight seem to be much more literal in that regard, as in they're actually draining something from you that you need to live. So while an argument could be made, I don't think it fits just wight. I'm sorry, I had to, it was in the script. Our last two contenders I actually find equally possible and equally convincing, those being Draugr and Revenants. Now, if you've heard the name Draugr before, you're likely thinking of these corpse-like enemies from Skyrim. And, well, yeah, that pretty much describes what a Draugr is. Draugr are specifically a sort of undead guardian, whose role in their life is defending a specific item or area. Draugr are oftentimes depicted as heavily armored when they're revived, which definitely matches up with Springtrap if you ask me. There are some sources saying that changing their size is a power as well, which I'm not sure if that applies to the Springtrap super well, but while researching I did find a very interesting story. There's a Scandinavian epic called Grettir's Saga, which I hope I pronounced correctly, and in it there is a Draugr by the name of Glamour. Glamour is actually called a troll in the saga, but the description is more in line with a Draugr, so that's what he's regarded as. Anyway, Glamour is a woodcutter who was regarded as an indifferent Christian. He's an outcast, but because people around him believed a specific herd of sheep was haunted, none of them would approach them, except for Glamour. So he's asked to watch over them by a farmer, and he complies. However, he then goes missing, but when he returns, he's a Draugr and kills anything living he comes across. It's revealed that those killed by a Draugr are forced to come back as one themselves, something that keeps our undead in line with the zombies. I just thought it was interesting that there's a specific story wherein a man approaches a herd of sheep that are known to be haunted, and then comes back as an undead monster. It's kinda similar to William in that way, but if he is a Draugr, what exactly is he the guardian of? Well, in my opinion, Springtrap's only real thing he wants to protect is the past. William, across different sources, is motivated by a desire to keep control over the animatronics, over Freddy's, etc. So while he may not literally be tied to a specific tomb or treasure, if Springtrap is a Draugr, he's absolutely there to guard his own secrets. The other issue is intelligence. Whether or not Draugr retain their memories seems to be more of a toss-up. Sometimes it's omitted entirely from the sources I was looking into. However, I don't think a Draugr keeping its memories is all that unbelievable. So we'll say that Springtrap could very possibly be a Draugr. However, there is one more monster type that he could fit into, and that is a Revenant. The term Revenant is similar to a wight in the sense that it's sort of an umbrella term for any monster that's come back from the dead seeking vengeance. In fact, the term Revenant doesn't even have to specifically apply to monsters. Scorpion from the Mortal Kombat series is a Revenant. Spawn, the Image Comics anti-hero, is a Revenant. Hell, Freddy Krueger is by definition a Revenant. So is Springtrap? Well, he absolutely could be. Far more than any other entry on this list, Revenants are the most common undead I've spoken about today that remember their past lives. In fact, it's their past lives that motivate them to exact vengeance now. And unlike many other monsters I've listed, which have a semi-uniform appearance to them, Revenants are kind of a free-for-all with appearance. Most of the time there will be some indication that they are undead, whether it be a skeletal appearance or dead flesh. But it's not a requirement really, and Revenants oftentimes have some really unique powers. Unlike other undead who oftentimes want to eat you or drain your life force in some way, Revenants don't really care about sustaining themselves in that way. Rather, their sole focus is revenge. So, could Springtrap be a Revenant? Absolutely, but we'd have to talk about why he wants revenge. Because let's face it, everyone William wanted dead, he killed while he was alive. If anything, the kids coming back as haunted animatronics and killing William kind of makes them seem more like Revenants than William himself. But maybe his revenge isn't targeted at any one person. Maybe it's more of a general revenge against the world. Or maybe he's just crazy and came back through the power of batshit insanity. Whatever. So between the two, Revenant seems to be the easy way out, but I just think Draugr is a much more interesting option. In all likelihood, if Scott ever had to define what Springtrap is, he'd probably either call him a zombie or a Revenant. But for this video, I specifically wanted to make a case for what I thought was the best possible fit, but that's game Springtrap. Before we end the video out, we're going to talk about book Springtrap. The main difference between game and book Springtrap is that while I would call game Springtrap definitely undead, book Springtrap just might not be. Like, he probably still is undead, but for this we're going to operate under the belief that he never died. So what kind of monster is this Springtrap? Well, one significant similarity between this one and the last is that they're both still, well, Springtrapped. Metal and flesh are still stuck together. Well, there's a lot less folklore to work with here compared to different undead types, but I think the most fitting description would be a cyborg. A cyborg is a mix of robot and person, typically inseparable. To be honest, I was a little disappointed there's not really anything hyper-specific that captures what book Springtrap is outside of this term, but I felt like I had to talk about this version of the character since they're the most distinct iteration of Springtrap from the classic one from FNAF 3. And don't get me started on Glitch Trap, Burn Trap, or the Afton amalgamation. I've already spent enough brain cells on this. Who knows? Maybe in the future I'll go further into this topic. I had a lot of fun doing the research for this video. And if you enjoyed it, be sure to subscribe and let me know what you want to see next. I'm Demuted. Peace.